In the heart of New York City, where fortunes are forged and reputations are shattered, in a single evening, the annual Starlight Gala was the apex of the social season. Tonight, all eyes were on tech titan Diego Stafford and his new fiancée, a woman half his age with diamonds that glittered like her ambition. He paraded her like a trophy, a public declaration that his past, his quiet, unassuming ex-wife, Melanie, was nothing but a forgotten footnote. But in a world of curated perfection, a single moment can unravel everything. A gasp, a sudden silence, a turn of heads toward the grand entrance. Because the footnote just walked in, and she was about to rewrite the entire story. The Grand Astoria ballroom was a testament to opulent excess. Light from 3 colossal crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, fractured into a million shimmering pieces, dancing across the gilded cornices and the sea of couture-clad guests below. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, vibrated with the carefully modulated hum of the city's elite. This was the Starlight Gala for children's health, an event where compassion was a currency and social standing was the ultimate prize. And tonight, Diego Stafford was winning. He stood near the sweeping marble staircase, one hand possessively on the small of his fiancée's back, the other holding a flute of Dom Perignon. At 45, Diego was a force of nature. His company, Stafford Innovations, had revolutionized data security, making him a billionaire before his 40th birthday. He had a predator's smile, sharp and knowing, and eyes the color of cold steel that missed nothing. He had built his empire on ruthless acquisitions and an unerring instinct for weakness. His fiancée, Tiffany Dubois, was the perfect accessory to his success. She was 24, a former brand strategist, whose primary brand seemed to be herself. Her gown was a fiery red, Alexander McQueen, audacious and unforgiving, clinging to a figure honed by personal trainers and a disciplined diet of kale and ambition. A necklace of staggering canary diamonds, a recent gift from Diego, blazed at her throat. She laughed a sound that was a little too loud, a little too practiced, designed to draw every eye in her vicinity. "Darling," she purred, tilting her head back so the light caught the facets of her earrings. Robert Carlyle from Forbes is staring again. He must be desperate for a quote about the merger. Diego squeezed her waist gently. "Let him be desperate. Tonight is about us. And of course," he added, with a magnanimous wave, "the children." His gaze swept the room with an air of supreme ownership. He saw the subtle nods of deference, the envious glances, the way people angled themselves to catch his eye. This was his world, a kingdom he had built from the ground up, and every piece of it was a reflection of his power, especially the woman beside him. Tiffany was everything his ex-wife Melanie had not been. She was vibrant, sexually confident, and utterly enamored with the public stage. Melanie. The name surfaced in his mind like a phantom, unwelcome and irritating. He hadn't thought of her in months, not really. Their divorce had been finalized a year ago, a clean surgical cut. He had been generous, of course. His lawyers had ensured the world knew just how generous he was. He'd given her the quiet suburban house they had once shared, and a settlement that to anyone else would seem immense. To him, it was a rounding error, the cost of shedding dead weight. He remembered their last meeting in the lawyer's office. Melanie had been so beige. Her sensible grey suit, her hair pulled back in a simple knot, her face pale and devoid of makeup. She had looked drained, a ghost haunting the edges of his vibrant new life. She hadn't fought him. She hadn't screamed or cried or thrown things. She had just sat there, her hands clasped in her lap, her silence more unnerving than any tirade. "Is this what you want, Diego?" she had asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's what's necessary, Melanie." He'd replied, his tone clipped and final. "We've grown apart. I'm moving forward. You're not." The unspoken words hung in the air. You're not young enough, not exciting enough, not beautiful enough. You are the starter wife, the cocoon I had to shed to become the butterfly. He had convinced himself it was true. She had been the quiet librarian's daughter. He'd met in college, the steady grounding force, while he was a chaotic storm of ambition. She'd managed their home, supported his early ventures with her small inheritance, and provided a calm refuge from his battles in the boardroom. But refuges become prisons when you want to fly. I still can't believe she had the nerve to try and keep the Rothkos, Tiffany said suddenly, pulling him from his reverie. She was scrolling through her phone, a smirk playing on her perfectly glossed lips. I saw the auction results from Sotheby's. She sold them. Probably needed the money to fix the roof on that sad little house. Diego grunted. The two Mark Rothko paintings had been a point of contention. Melanie had a preternatural eye for art, a skill he'd once found charming and had even profited from. She'd bought the paintings years ago, long before their value had skyrocketed. She'd claimed they were a joint investment, bought with money from her family. His lawyers had argued otherwise. In the end, as part of the settlement, she had been forced to sell one, and he had kept the other, the larger, more significant piece which now hung in the lobby of Stafford Tower. She has no appreciation for what they represent, Diego said dismissively. To her, they were just colours on a canvas. To me, they represent vision, the foresight to acquire a masterpiece. He conveniently forgot that it was Melanie who had stood for hours in a dusty gallery, convincing a skeptical dealer that she, a young woman in a simple coat, understood the soul of the artist. The orchestra began to play a soft waltz. A few couples drifted onto the dance floor. The atmosphere was one of serene, self-congratulatory elegance. Diego felt a surge of triumph. Everything was perfect. He had the business world by the throat, the most talked-about woman in New York on his arm, and the ghost of his past was exactly where she belonged in the past. Forgotten, irrelevant. It was precisely at that moment, when his satisfaction was at its absolute peak, that the low hum of the ballroom began to change. It started not as a sound, but as a feeling, a subtle shift in the room's energy. A few conversations near the grand entrance faltered. Heads turned not with casual interest, but with a sharp, unified focus. The movement rippled inward, a wave of silent inquiry spreading through the crowd. Tiffany noticed it first. "What is it? Did a celebrity arrive?" she asked, craning her neck. Diego followed her gaze. A pathway was parting in the crowd, a silent corridor being carved through the sea of tuxedos and ball gowns. The guests weren't just looking, they were staring. Jaws were slack. Champagne flutes were held, forgotten halfway to lips. Even Robert Carlyle of Forbes had lowered his phone, his reporter's instincts replaced by simple, unadulterated shock. And then he saw her. For a disorienting second, his brain refused to process the image. It was like seeing a character from a black and white film suddenly appear in vibrant, blinding technicolor. The woman standing at the top of the stairs was tall, poised her posture, radiating a calm authority that seemed to command the very air around her. Her hair, which he remembered as a simple brown, was now a rich, deep chestnut, styled in elegant waves that cascaded over one shoulder. Her face was luminous, her features sculpted by a subtle, masterful hand, highlighting the high cheekbones and intelligent eyes he'd once claimed to love. But it was the gown that was causing the collective paralysis. It wasn't just a dress. It was a work of art, a cascade of midnight blue silk organza and hand-embroidered platinum thread that seemed to have captured a piece of the cosmos. Thousands of tiny, meticulously placed diamonds and sapphires glittered within its folds, not with the gaudy fire of Tiffany's necklace, but with the deep, mysterious twinkle of a distant nebula. The gown flowed from a structured, corseted bodice down to a sweeping train that pooled on the marble floor like liquid moonlight. It was a garment that spoke not of expense, but of legacy. It was breathtaking. It was magnificent. It was Diego's mind calculated with the speed of a stock market algorithm, astronomically expensive. And the woman wearing it, the woman who was now descending the staircase with the unhurried grace of a queen, was his ex-wife, Melanie Price. The silence that had fallen over the Grand Astoria ballroom was profound. It was a heavy-weighted quiet, thick with shock and disbelief. The orchestra, sensing the seismic shift in the room's atmosphere, trailed off mid-note, the last violin string seeming to hang in the air like a question mark. All the power, all the attention, all the ambient energy that had been orbiting Diego and Tiffany just moments before had now been captured by a new, irresistible gravitational force at the top of the stairs. Melanie descended. She didn't hurry. Each step was deliberate, poised her hand gliding lightly along the polished marble balustrade. Her expression was serene, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph or malice. It was one of quiet confidence of a woman perfectly at ease in her own skin, in her own power. She wasn't looking at Diego. Her gaze was directed forward, scanning the room with a calm, appraising look, as if she were merely a guest arriving at a party where she knew she belonged. The gown was the epicenter of the spectacle. Whispers finally began to break the silence, starting in the back and rippling forward like a gathering storm. "My God, is that a Devereaux?" a woman with a Chanel tweed jacket hissed to her companion. "I thought he stopped designing." "Julian Devereaux." "No, it can't be. He hasn't done a private commission in 20 years. Look at the embroidery, the starlight pattern. That's his signature. That's not a dress, that's a museum piece." Julian Devereaux was a name whispered, with the reverence usually reserved for deities or ghosts. The legendary couturier had been the darling of royalty and old money dynasties before abruptly retiring at the peak of his fame, disgusted by the commercialism of modern fashion. He lived in monastic seclusion in a Scottish castle, rumoured to occasionally create a piece for his own artistic satisfaction, pieces that were never sold, only gifted or vaulted away. To wear a new Devereaux was not a matter of money, it was a matter of being deemed worthy by the master himself. And this gown was unmistakably new, a celestial masterpiece that made every other designer piece in the room look like a cheap imitation. Someone near the press line, a young fashion blogger with a rapidly growing following, was already typing furiously into her phone. Sources say the gown features over 10 zero assemblats hand-set diamonds and sapphires from a private collection. Early estimate at least $2 million, maybe more. The figure shot through the room via text messages and hushed exchanges, adding another layer of awe and confusion to the scene. $2 million, worn by Melanie Price, the forgotten ex-wife. Diego felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was a feeling he despised, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, the loss of control. He watched her, and it was like looking at a stranger. The Melanie he had discarded was a creature of earth tones and comfortable fabrics. She preferred books to parties' quiet nights to glittering galas. She would have considered a dress like this to be the height of frivolous absurdity. This woman, this vision descending the stairs, was someone else entirely. She had been remade, reforged in some unknown fire. Beside him, Tiffany was practically vibrating with fury. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of incandescent rage, her knuckles white as she gripped her clutch. "What is she doing here?" she spat, her voice a venomous whisper. "And what in God's name is she wearing? Did she blow her entire settlement on a single dress? How pathetic." But the words rang hollow even to Diego. This wasn't pathetic. It was a declaration of war. A silent, elegant, devastatingly effective coup. Melanie hadn't screamed or thrown a tantrum. She had simply arrived, and in doing so, had made Tiffany's ostentatious diamonds and fiery red dress look cheap and desperate. She had stolen the spotlight without saying a single word. As Melanie reached the bottom of the staircase, a collective breath was released. She paused, and for the first time, her eyes swept over to where Diego and Tiffany stood. There was no flicker of pain, no hint of longing. There was only a cool, detached recognition, the kind one might give to a piece of furniture that had been rearranged. Her gaze lingered on him for a barest second before moving to Tiffany, taking in the McQueen dress and the canary diamonds with an almost clinical lack of interest. Then she gave a small, polite nod, a gesture of distant civility, and turned away. The spell was broken. The room erupted into a cacophony of excited chatter. People were no longer looking at Diego. They were looking at Melanie, trying to catch her eye, trying to understand the impossible transformation. The city's most influential figures, men and women Diego had spent years cultivating, were now gravitating toward his ex-wife. He watched in disbelief as Michael Beaumont, the elderly patriarch of a real estate dynasty, a man famously impervious to social climbing, moved to greet her. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of old-world respect. "Mrs. Price," Beaumont said, his voice carrying in the relative quiet around them. "An unexpected pleasure. You look magnificent." "Mr. Beaumont," Melanie replied, her voice the same one Diego remembered, yet imbued with a new timbre of confidence. "Thank you. It's for a wonderful cause." She was a natural. She moved through this crowd with an easy grace, fielding compliments with humility and engaging in conversation with an intelligence that was drawing people in. She spoke to a curator from the MoMA about the nuances of post-war expressionism. She discussed philanthropic strategy with the chairwoman of the gala, demonstrating an encyclopedic knowledge of the charity's work. Diego felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck. This was the Melanie he had deliberately forgotten, the brilliant, perceptive woman who could hold her own in any intellectual circle. He had buried that memory under a narrative of her being plain and uninteresting because it suited him. He had wanted a beautiful ornament, not an intellectual equal. Now her brilliance, which he had once found stifling, was on full display, and the world was captivated. "Do something," Tiffany hissed, digging her nails into his arm. "She's making a fool of us. Go over there. Put her in her place." Diego knew it was a terrible idea. Confronting her now, while she was the center of this magnetic pull, would make him look petty and weak. But seeing the smirks on the faces of his rivals, the speculative looks from journalists, the sheer, unadulterated awe directed at the woman he had cast off, it was intolerable. His ego, the engine of his entire existence, demanded he reassert his dominance. He straightened his bow tie, plastered his predator's smile back on his face, and began to move toward her, Tiffany trailing in his wake like a furious shadow. He would remind her and everyone else who she was. She was his ex-wife, a relic, and he was Diego Stafford, the king of this world. He just had to remind his subjects. The path to Melanie was like wading through molasses. The very air around her seemed thicker, charged with the energy of the crowd's fascination. As Diego approached, conversations lulled, and eyes shifted, sensing the impending collision. This was the drama they had been craving, the real reason many of them attended these events, to witness the rise and fall of fortunes, both social and financial. Melanie was speaking with Alistair Finch, a notoriously sharp and discerning British investor known for his Midas touch in the tech sector. Finch was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that held a lifetime of shrewd calculations. He was the white whale of venture capital, and Diego had been trying to secure a meeting with him for 6 months, hoping to get Finch to invest in his new AI-driven satellite project. His assistant had been repeatedly rebuffed. Yet here was Melanie chatting with him, as if they were old friends. The ethical framework is the most crucial component, Melanie was saying, her tone earnest and compelling. Predictive analytics without a strong moral compass is just a high-tech weapon. The potential for misuse is staggering. Finch nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on her. "A refreshing perspective, Mrs. Price. Most founders I meet talk about disruption and market share. Few mention morality. Before Melanie could respond, Diego inserted himself into the conversation, his smile wide and artificial. Alistair, I didn't realize you knew my ex-wife. He placed a deliberate, condescending emphasis on the word ex. Alistair Finch turned his cool gaze on Diego. I didn't. I'm having the pleasure of making her acquaintance now. We were just discussing the ethics of artificial intelligence. Ah, ethics, Diego said, with a dismissive chuckle clapping Finch on the shoulder. Melanie was always more of a philosopher than a businesswoman, an admirable, if not particularly profitable trait. He looked at Melanie, his eyes glinting with malice. That's a rather spectacular dress, Melanie. You must have broken the bank. I hope you're managing your finances wisely. It was a low blow, a public insinuation that she was a foolish spendthrift living off his scraps. The small circle of onlookers held their breath. Melanie didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Diego, she said, her voice even and calm. It's a Devereaux, a gift from the artist. And as for my finances, she added, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. You taught me the importance of shrewd investments. I've been applying the lesson. The comeback was perfect. It was polite, it deflected his jab, and it contained a subtle barb of its own, hinting at a success he knew nothing about. Finch's eyebrow arched in appreciation. Tiffany, however, lacked any sense of subtlety. Seeing Diego's attack fail, she stepped forward, her voice dripping with faux concern. Melanie, it's so good to see you out and about. We were so worried. After the divorce, you just disappeared. It's wonderful that you're feeling up to all this. She gestured vaguely at the opulent room. The implication clear, you don't belong here. She then zeroed in on the dress. $2 million, they're saying. Honestly, I think it's a bit much, don't you? For a charity event, it almost feels like you're trying to make the cause about yourself. Diego and I believe in quiet, substantive giving. This was a direct attack on Melanie's character, painting her as a selfish show-off. Diego watched, a cruel sense of satisfaction blooming in his chest. This, he thought, was how you handle her. Melanie turned her full attention to Tiffany. The shift was subtle, but the temperature around them seemed to drop by several degrees. She looked Tiffany up and down, her gaze lingering for a moment on the garish canary diamond necklace. It's interesting you mentioned substantive giving, Tiffany, Melanie said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with an edge of pure steel. This gala supports research into pediatric neurological disorders. It's a cause that's deeply personal to me. My younger sister Clara passed away from an undiagnosed glioma when she was 9. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The manufactured drama of the evening suddenly felt cheap and tawdry in the face of such a genuine, painful truth. Tiffany's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. She had tried to score a social point and had stumbled into a minefield of real grief. Melanie wasn't finished. As for the dress, she continued, her voice softening slightly. Julian Devereaux is an old family friend of my mother's. When he heard I would be attending tonight in Clara's memory, he insisted on creating something special. He called it Clara's Constellation. His gift, he said, was to ensure that no one would forget why we are truly here. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. So, no, I don't think it's a bit much. I think it's a tribute. She had not only defended herself, but had elevated the gown from a symbol of wealth to a memorial of love and loss. She had seized the moral high ground with such effortless grace that Tiffany was left speechless, her face flushed with humiliation. She had been exposed not just as catty, but as profoundly insensitive. Alistair Finch, who had been observing the entire exchange with the focus of a chess master, spoke into the silence. A beautiful tribute, Mrs. Price, truly. He then turned to Diego, his expression now decidedly frosty. Stafford, I believe my associate informed your office that my Q3 investment portfolio is fully committed. I won't have time for a meeting. Diego's smile froze on his face. It was a polite, public, and utterly brutal dismissal. Finch had just slammed the door on a potential $100 million investment in front of half of New York's financial elite. He hadn't just said no, he had made a point of saying it here now in the immediate aftermath of Diego and Tiffany's callousness. Diego felt the floor drop out from beneath him. He had come over to reassert his dominance and had instead been handed a devastating public defeat. He looked at Melanie, who was now graciously accepting a glass of water from a passing waiter, her composure absolute. There was a dangerous depth in her eyes he'd never seen before, or perhaps had simply refused to acknowledge. He had believed he'd shed his quiet, unassuming wife. But the woman standing before him was not a ghost. She was a queen, and she had just with devastating precision captured his king. The game, he was beginning to realize, had only just begun. Reeling from Finch's public rebuke, Diego retreated to the periphery of the ballroom, dragging a seething Tiffany with him. He needed a drink, something stronger than champagne, and a moment to recalibrate. The carefully constructed narrative of his evening of his life was fracturing before his eyes. "This is your fault," Tiffany hissed, her voice low and shaky with rage. "You were supposed to handle her. You let her walk all over you, all over us." "Be quiet," Diego snapped, his tone dangerously soft. He motioned to a waiter for a whiskey neat. "You're the one who brought up the dress. You walked right into her little sob story." "Sob story? She probably made that up." "Her sister?" Tiffany trailed off, realizing how monstrous she sounded. The problem was, she knew it was true. In the early days of their affair, Diego had once mentioned, in a moment of rare introspection, the shadow that the death of Melanie's sister had cast over her family. He had framed it as a source of her melancholy and risk aversion. Now Melanie had weaponized that same vulnerability, turning it into a shield of unimpeachable moral strength. Diego's mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. The dress from a reclusive genius, the impossible poise, the instant rapport with a man like Alistair Finch. This wasn't a woman spending her alimony on a revenge dress. This was a calculated, strategic maneuver, and he had no idea what its objective was. The line she'd said to him echoed in his head. "You taught me the importance of shrewd investments. I've been applying the lesson." What investments? He had made sure the settlement, while large, wouldn't allow her to play in his league. He'd seen to it that her assets were mostly tied up in trusts and low-yield bonds managed by a firm loyal to him. He had designed it to be a comfortable cage, not a launch pad. Had she found a loophole? Meanwhile, across the room, Melanie was not basking in her social victory. She was working. After her conversation with Finch, she had been approached by several other key figures, including the technology editor for the New York Times and a prominent bioethicist from Columbia University. Her conversation was no longer about art or memories, it was about the future. Alistair Finch, having extricated himself from another conversation, made his way back to her side. "Mrs. Price," he began, his tone now one of pure business. "Your perspective on the ethical implementation of AI is not merely refreshing, it's vital. You speak with the authority of someone who is not just an observer. Forgive my directness, but what is it you do?" Melanie met his directness with her own. "Mr. Finch, after my divorce, I had two things in abundance: capital from the sale of some assets and time to think. I spent my life surrounded by beautiful things, mostly art. And I watched the art world become increasingly plagued by forgeries, uncertain provenance, and a lack of transparency that benefits criminals and cheats honest collectors." She paused, taking a sip of water. "My background is in art history, but my passion became technology, specifically how to apply it to solve this problem. Diego, my ex-husband, always saw my interest in art as a quaint hobby. He never saw its potential as a data set. Finch was listening intently, his mind clearly working. A data set, the largest, most complex, and most valuable data set in human history, Melanie confirmed. Every brushstroke, every canvas weave, every pigment composition is a unique signature. For the past year, I have been quietly building a company. We've assembled a team of the world's top art historians, materials, scientists, and most importantly, machine learning engineers. We've developed a proprietary AI that can analyze a piece of art at a microscopic level and determine its authenticity with a 99.98% accuracy rate, cross-referencing it against a blockchain-secured ledger of provenance we are building. She finally named it. We call it Veritas Art. The name hung in the air between them. Veritas, Latin for truth. It was a brilliant, elegant name for a company designed to bring certainty to a world of smoke and mirrors. Finch's eyes, which had been shrewd, now lit up with the unmistakable spark of discovery. This was what he lived for. Not just another social media app or a marginal improvement in data storage, but a true paradigm shift. A company that could disrupt and dominate a multi-billion-dollar global market. You've kept this quiet, Finch stated, a hint of awe in his voice. No press, no funding rounds. We've been operating in stealth mode funded entirely by my own capital, Melanie explained. I didn't want the hype and speculation that comes with venture funding until the technology was perfect. We're finalizing our beta phase now. We've already uncovered 3 masterpieces in private collections that were in fact sophisticated forgeries, saving our initial clients over $100 million. This was the masterstroke. She wasn't just a founder with an idea. She was a founder with a proven, functioning, and highly profitable product. She had used her own money, taken her own risks, and built her empire in silence, right under Diego's nose. The Rothko she had been forced to sell, he suddenly understood. She hadn't sold it for living expenses. She had sold it for seed money. She had liquidated one masterpiece to build a machine that could verify all of them. From his vantage point, Diego could see the intensity of the conversation between Melanie and Finch. He saw Finch nod a slow, deliberate gesture of profound agreement. He saw him hand Melanie his private business card, not the one his assistant gave out, but his personal one. It was the venture capital equivalent of a knighting. I have a feeling, Miss Price, Finch said, his voice low but clear, that Veritas Art is going to change the world. My fund, Finch Global, doesn't just invest in companies. We invest in visionaries. I would be honored to be a part of your journey. My team will call yours on Monday. We will make you an offer that reflects the magnitude of what you've built. Diego felt a wave of nausea. He had been trying to get Finch's money for a speculative satellite project. Melanie had just secured it for a fully realized, world-changing company he never even knew existed. She hadn't just stolen his spotlight, she had stolen his future. He looked at his ex-wife, truly seeing her for the first time in a decade. The quiet, supportive partner he had called a philosopher had taken her passion, her intelligence, the very qualities he had belittled, and forged them into a weapon more powerful than any he possessed. He had built an empire of code and contracts. She had built an empire of truth and beauty. And at the biggest social event of the year, in front of everyone who mattered, she had just unveiled it. Not with a press release or a flashy presentation, but with a quiet conversation, all while wearing a $2 million gown that was nothing more than a beautiful distraction from her real power. The main event of the evening, the live auction, was meant to be the climax of the gala, a chance for the city's wealthiest to publicly display their generosity. For Diego, it was now a desperate last stand. He had been humiliated socially and outmaneuvered in business. His only remaining card was wealth, raw and overwhelming. He planned to make the night's largest donation, a spectacular headline-grabbing figure that would reassert his dominance and reduce Melanie's triumph to a footnote. The auctioneer, a charismatic man with a rapid-fire delivery, worked the room, selling off luxury vacations, rare wines, and unique experiences. Diego sat with Tiffany at their front row table, brooding. Tiffany was uncharacteristically quiet, scrolling furiously through her phone, her face tight with anxiety. The whispers about Melanie's tribute to her sister had made her a pariah for the moment. Every sympathetic glance thrown Melanie's way felt like an accusation against her. Finally, the grand finale item was announced. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our final lot of the evening," the auctioneer boomed. "A truly priceless opportunity, a private one-on-one design consultation, and dinner with the master himself, the legendary, the reclusive, Julian Devereux." A collective gasp went through the room. Devereux hadn't made a public appearance in 2 decades. This was an unprecedented, almost mythical prize. The auctioneer explained that Devereux, moved by the gala's cause, had agreed to this one-time exception, with all proceeds going to the charity. Diego saw his opening. This was it. He would buy access to the man who had inadvertently become the symbol of his humiliation. He would own the connection. He would win. "We will start the bidding at $100,000, the auctioneer declared. Hands shot up immediately. 150, 200, 250,000. Diego let the amateurs play. He waited, letting the bidding climb past $500,000. When it slowed at 600,000, he raised his paddle. $1 million, he said, his voice ringing with authority. A hush fell over the room. It was an audacious, powerful bid designed to shut down all competition. But on the other side of the room, a shipping magnate with a point to prove raised his paddle. 1.1 million, Diego countered immediately. 1.5 million. The room buzzed with excitement. This was the spectacle they had been waiting for. The magnate hesitated, conferred with his wife, and reluctantly shook his head. The auctioneer's gavel was raised. $1.5 million going once, going twice. This was his moment of redemption. But before the gavel could fall, the chairwoman of the gala, a graceful woman named Beatrice Vanderbilt, walked onto the stage and held up a hand, speaking quietly to the auctioneer. He nodded his eyes odd and lowered his gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice said, her voice amplified by the microphone, "we have a brief and rather wonderful interruption. While the generosity on display tonight has been truly heartwarming, I have just been informed that we received a donation earlier this evening. A donation made privately without fanfare before the gala even began." She paused for dramatic effect. Diego felt a prickle of unease. "This single donation," Beatrice continued, her voice filled with emotion, "is the largest in the Starlight Gala's 20-year history. It is enough to fully fund the construction and staffing of a new state-of-the-art pediatric neuro research wing at the hospital, which will be named in memory of a young girl who lost her battle with cancer far too soon, the Clara Price Research Pavilion." The name hit Diego like a physical shock. Clara Price. Beatrice smiled warmly. The donor wished to remain anonymous, but in light of her presence here tonight, and with her gracious permission, we feel it is only right to acknowledge her. The $5 million donation was made by the founder of Veritas Art, Mrs. Melanie Price. If Melanie's arrival had caused a shockwave, this was an earthquake. The room erupted not into chatter, but into thunderous, sustained applause. People were rising to their feet, turning to face Melanie, their faces a mixture of awe and profound respect. Her $1.5 million bid was now rendered meaningless, a gaudy display of ego next to an act of transformative, silent philanthropy. He had tried to buy the spotlight, and she had already purchased the entire stage, the building, and the moral soul of the evening. Melanie, looking genuinely surprised by the announcement, simply inclined her head, a humble gesture that only amplified her grace. She had given a fortune in her sister's name and hadn't wanted anyone to know. As Diego sat paralyzed by this final checkmate move, a second more insidious crisis was unfolding at his own table. Tiffany's face had gone sheet white. Her phone was buzzing incessantly. A well-known gossip columnist, a woman Tiffany had snubbed earlier in the evening, just posted a story on her widely read blog. The headline was devastating. The Stafford Fiancée's fairy tale passed more fiction than fact. The article, citing multiple sources from her hometown, methodically dismantled Tiffany's carefully constructed identity. She had not graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. She had attended a community college for 2 semesters. She was never a senior brand strategist at a top marketing firm. She had been an unpaid intern who was let go after 3 months. The story included quotes from former colleagues and even a screenshot of her old, unpolished LinkedIn profile before it was scrubbed and replaced with a fabricated history. The news spread through the ballroom with the speed of a digital virus. On phones hidden under tablecloths, the story was being shared, commented on, and dissected. The whispers started again, but this time they were laced with ridicule. "Did you see the whole resume is fake? And he's a tech genius, and he couldn't even run a background check on his own fiancée. He traded in a woman who builds empires for one who builds fairy tales." The facade had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million pieces. Diego was sitting next to a fraud, a woman whose entire value was based on a lie. His judgment, his intelligence, his very perception, all of it was now called into question. He had paraded her as a symbol of his new, upgraded life, and she had just been exposed as a cheap counterfeit. The irony was so thick he could choke on it. He looked across the room at Melanie, now surrounded by admirers, Finch Beaumont, the gala chairwoman. She was bathed in a glow of authentic respect. Then he looked at Tiffany, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with terror and pleading. In that moment, Diego Stafford, the titan of industry, the king of his world, understood the full crushing weight of his defeat. He had lost everything that mattered tonight. The deal, the respect of his peers, his public image, and his own self-deception. He had thrown away a diamond and picked up a piece of glittering glass. The applause, a thunderous wave of validation for Melanie, finally crested and receded, leaving behind a silence at Diego's table that was more damning than any accusation. The air grew thick and heavy with what was unsaid. Around them, the ballroom was a hive of frantic, hushed communication. Phones glowed beneath tablecloths, their screens displaying the ruinous blog post. Glances sharp and fleeting, like thrown knives, cut across the room toward their table before quickly looking away. They were no longer guests. They were a spectacle of disgrace. Tiffany sat frozen, her face a kabuki mask of tragedy, the tears having carved pale channels through her expensive foundation. Her phone, which lay face up on the table, buzzed with a relentless, vicious rhythm. Each vibration a fresh wave of public scorn, another nail in the coffin of her fabricated life. "Diego," she whispered, her voice ragged. She reached for his hand, her touch tentative, desperate. "I can fix this. I'll release a statement. We can sue the columnist for libel. I can explain everything. It got out of hand. I just wanted to be good enough for you." Diego looked at her hand on his, then at her face. He felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, not even the heat of betrayal. All he felt was a profound, chilling disgust. She was a flawed product, a defective asset. Her lie wasn't the crime. The crime was her incompetence in maintaining it. She had allowed the pristine image he had curated for himself to be contaminated by her cheap, clumsy past. He pulled his hand away slowly. "There is no we," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, the finality of it more brutal than any shout. "You are a liability. I don't tolerate liabilities." He stood, the motion sharp and decisive. His chair scraped against the marble floor, a jarring, ugly sound in the suddenly quiet ballroom. He didn't offer her a hand. He didn't give her a backward glance. He simply turned and began his long walk toward the exit, leaving her to be swallowed by the silent judgment of the room. His stride was long and purposeful, his head held high in a defiant imitation of his usual arrogance. But it was a hollow performance. He could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on him, could sense the smirks and whispers that followed in his wake. The journey across the ballroom floor was a gauntlet of his own making. He passed a rival tech CEO, a man he'd gloated to just hours earlier, who now gave him a slow, pitying shake of the head. He saw a circle of society women, their faces a mixture of glee and mock sympathy, their whispers ceasing the moment he looked their way. This was what failure felt like, not a sudden crash, but a slow, agonizing corrosion of deference into contempt. He was halfway to the grand staircase, his escape almost in sight, when a figure stepped into his path, blocking his way as surely as a brick wall. It was Alastair Finch. The British investor stood with an air of immense stillness, his silver hair catching the light, his eyes holding no warmth, only a clear, piercing judgment. "Stafford," Finch said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through Diego's haze of fury and humiliation. "A word of advice, if I may." Diego bristled, forced to a halt. "I'm not in the mood for advice, Alastair." "I imagine not," Finch replied, his tone dry as dust. "But you'll want to hear this. For years, I've watched men like you operate. You worship at the altar of disruption. You measure success in market caps and brute force. But you consistently overlook the most valuable asset of all. It is not capital, nor technology, nor market share. It is integrity." Finch took a small step closer, his gaze unwavering. "It's the bedrock upon which lasting empires are built. It cannot be bought, it cannot be leveraged, and it cannot be acquired in a hostile takeover. It must be earned, and once lost." He paused, letting the weight of the word hang between them. "It is almost impossible to recover. You would do well to remember that." Before Diego could form a retort, Finch executed his final devastating maneuver. With a curt, dismissive nod, he turned his back on Diego and walked directly to where Melanie stood, preparing for her own departure. The move was a physical manifestation of the evening's power shift, a literal turning away from the disgraced past and toward the brilliant future. Diego stood rooted to the spot, watching as Finch, the man he had courted for months, approached his ex-wife with a reverence he had never been shown. "Mrs. Price," Finch said, his voice now warm with genuine admiration as he took her hand. "An absolute honor. My office will be in touch first thing Monday morning. I anticipate a very long and very profitable partnership." "Thank you, Alastair," Melanie replied, her voice the epitome of grace. "I look forward to it." The sight of it, the handshake, the mutual respect, the sealing of a deal that should have been his, was the final breaking point. The carefully controlled dam of his composure shattered. He had to understand. He pushed through a cluster of gawking guests, his movements clumsy with desperation, and confronted her at the base of the staircase. "Melanie." The name was a raw, guttural sound, torn from his throat. She turned to face him fully. She was no longer a ghost from his past, or a stranger in a beautiful gown. She was an immovable force, her serenity, the calm eye of the storm that had just torn his life apart. The thousands of tiny diamonds on her Devereux gown seemed to glitter like a triumphant constellation, mocking him with their cold, celestial light. "Was this all for revenge?" he demanded, the question bursting from him, a desperate plea for an explanation his ego could process. "The company, the dress, Finch, all of it. Did you spend a year plotting this? This elaborate scheme just to humiliate me?" He needed it to be about him. The alternative, that he was merely a footnote in her story, was simply incomprehensible. Melanie looked at him, and a profound sadness softened the powerful composure of her features. It was the look of a teacher watching a student fail the simplest, most fundamental lesson. "Oh, Diego," she said, her voice quiet, imbued not with malice, but with a weary clarity. "You still don't get it, do you? After all this, you still believe the world revolves around you, that every action is either for you or against you." And she took a single deliberate step closer, her presence commanding the space between them. This was never about revenge. It was about resurrection. He saw her take a slow breath, gathering the story of her past year into a single powerful truth. When you left me, you did more than just end our marriage. You tried to erase me. You took my history. You took my confidence. You took the voice that told me I had value outside of being your wife. You told the world I wasn't enough, and for a long, quiet time, I believed you. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the rooms you had abandoned. Her gaze was unblinking, forcing him to see the truth he had so long ignored. This past year wasn't about destroying you. It was about rebuilding me, from the foundation up. Her voice gained strength, each word a carefully laid brick in her new reality. Veritas art was born from my passion for truth and beauty, the very things you always dismissed as a quaint hobby. The donation was for my sister Clara, a defining part of my soul you never bothered to learn. And this dress, she glanced down at the magnificent creation, is not a weapon. It is a gift from a dear friend who saw my strength long before I could see it myself. It is a tribute to the memory of a love that was real and pure. She held his gaze, her final judgment, both merciful and absolute. This evening wasn't a plot against you, Diego. It was my announcement to myself, first and foremost, that I am no longer a supporting character in your story. I am the author of my own. She looked past him, then toward the wreckage he had made of his own life, embodied by the weeping figure of Tiffany. You surround yourself with reflections of your own ego, hoping their praise will convince you of your own greatness. But a hall of mirrors is still just an empty room. I truly hope for your sake that one day you find something real to put in it. With that, she turned. She did not storm off or flee. She simply ascended the grand staircase, her movements unhurried and regal. The train of Clara's constellation flowed behind her like a river of starlight, a breathtaking sight. The entire ballroom watched in silence, a collective, unspoken acknowledgement that they were witnessing not an ending, but a coronation. She never looked back. Diego Stafford stood alone, a statue in the middle of the ballroom. The buzzing chatter of the crowd slowly returned, but it sounded distant and distorted the noise of a world to which he no longer fully belonged. He was a king in a fallen kingdom, left with nothing but the bitter ashes of his pride, haunted by the devastating clarity of her final words. Melanie pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp embrace of the New York night. The air was clean, a welcome antidote to the cloying atmosphere of the gala. The city skyline blazed before her, a familiar panorama that suddenly felt new, a landscape of infinite possibility. She took a deep, shuddering breath, a breath of pure, unadulterated freedom. The weight of the past, the grief, the betrayal, the crushing inadequacy had finally been lifted. The magnificent gown, which had served as her armor for the battle, now felt light like a second skin. Its purpose was served. Her work was just beginning. Veritas Art needed her. The Clara Price Research Pavilion needed to be built. She smiled a genuine private smile. She had walked into the fire of her past and emerged, not burned but forged. Her new dawn was here, and it was brighter than all the city lights combined. And so the Starlight Gala ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, earth-shattering triumph of a woman who refused to be forgotten. Melanie Price walked into that ballroom as an ex-wife and walked out as a legend. This wasn't just a story about a revenge dress. It was a story about reclaiming one's narrative. It's a testament to the fact that true power isn't about the noise you make or the money you flaunt, but about the silent, unshakable strength you build when no one is watching. It's about turning your deepest pains into your greatest passions and realizing that your worth is never ever determined by the person who leaves you behind. What did you think of Melanie's incredible transformation? Were you cheering for her every step of the way? Let us know in the comments below. At the most exclusive charity ball of the year, one man made a fatal mistake. He thought his ex-wife was a ghost from a past he'd successfully buried under a mountain of social media posts and public adoration for his new influencer fiancée. He paraded his new life like a trophy, intending to rub her face in what she'd lost. But he failed to notice the quiet, unassuming man by her side. He didn't realize that while he was busy trying to own the room for a night, her date was about to own the entire building. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story about the deafening silence of true power in a world obsessed with empty noise. Sophia Hayes considered the invitation for the third time. The thick, cream-colored cardstock felt heavy in her hands, its embossed silver lettering shimmering under the warm light of her small, meticulously organized apartment. The annual Phoenix Ball for Children's Aid, the Serafina Grand Hotel. It was the event of the season, a place to see and be seen, a glittering constellation of old money, new tech, and the carefully curated fame of the digital age. It was also the last place on earth she wanted to be. 2 years ago, a place like the Serafina was her natural habitat. She had navigated these shark-infested waters with a practiced grace, not as Sophia Hayes, but as Mrs. Leo Vance. She had been the silent partner, the steady hand, the behind-the-scenes strategist who had helped build Leo's boutique marketing firm from a two-person operation in a cramped office into the Vance lifestyle brand. She'd managed the finances, edited the proposals, and smoothed over the egos of clients he'd nearly alienated with his burgeoning arrogance. She had been the foundation upon which he built his shiny, fragile empire. And then came Skylar Monroe. Skylar wasn't just a person. She was a phenomenon, a cascade of professionally lit selfies, aspirational quotes pasted over stock photos of sunsets, and day-in-the-life vlogs that were as authentic as a $3 bill. With 50 million followers hanging on her every sponsored post, she was the human embodiment of the world Leo desperately wanted to conquer. He hadn't just left Sophia for Skylar. He had publicly rebranded his entire life, erasing Sophia's contributions, as if they were a draft of a post he'd decided not to publish. The divorce had been brutal, not financially, but emotionally. Leo had used his marketing savvy to paint a public narrative. He was the dynamic innovator held back by a quiet, unambitious wife. Now, with Skylar, he was finally unleashed. Their Instagram was a fire hose of performative happiness, private jets to Monaco, front row seats at Paris Fashion Week, and a nauseatingly detailed account of their whirlwind romance culminating in a beachside proposal captured by a drone. Their hashtag SkyLeoLimit was trending weekly. Sophia, in contrast, had chosen quiet dignity. She took a modest settlement enough to be comfortable, not enough to be idle, and started a small, bespoke business restoring antique books and documents. It was work that required patience, precision, and a love for things with history and substance. It was everything her former life was not. Her joy was now found in the scent of old paper and leather, the delicate process of mending a torn page, the quiet satisfaction of bringing something beautiful back from the brink of decay. Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend, Maya. "Don't you dare tell me you've already turned it into a bookmark." Maya's text read, followed by a string of champagne bottle emojis. Sophia smiled faintly. Still contemplating using it for kindling, she typed back. "No, you are going. I've already seen the posts. Skylar is wearing a custom Valdrin Sahiti gown. She's promised a royal entrance. And you cannot let them have the entire stage. You need to go and just exist. Beautifully. Unbothered. Unbothered. It felt like an impossible state of being. Every time a friend sympathetically mentioned seeing Leo and Skylar in a magazine or on a gossip site, the wound felt fresh. It wasn't that she wanted him back. God, no. It was the sting of being so thoroughly and publicly discarded. She was the inconvenient first chapter they'd ripped out of the book. "I don't have a dress," Sophia replied, a weak excuse. "I'll be over in an hour." We're going shopping, not for a battle dress, for an I've already won dress, Maya shot back. Later that week, feeling a strange mix of dread and resolve, Sophia found herself in a high-end boutique she would have never entered on her own. Maya was a force of nature, pulling gowns from racks with a determined gleam in her eye. Sophia felt awkward and out of place, a sepia photograph in a technicolor world. No, not that, Maya would say, dismissing a sequined number. Too loud. You're not competing with a parrot. You're a swan. Finally, Maya pulled out a dress of deep midnight blue silk. It was deceptively simple, a classic A-line cut, with a modest neckline and a low back. It didn't scream for attention. It didn't have feathers or 1,000 crystals. But when Sophia put it on, it felt like a second skin. It flowed, it whispered. It commanded a quiet, potent elegance. It was the physical embodiment of the woman she was trying to become. That's the one, Maya said, her voice soft with conviction. When you walk into that ballroom, you won't be Leo Vance's ex-wife. You'll just be Sophia, and that will be more than enough. Sophia looked at her reflection. She saw the hint of dark circles under her eyes, the lingering sadness in their depths. But she also saw a flicker of something else, a spark of defiance, a woman who had survived the fire and was still standing. Maybe Maya was right. It wasn't about winning a battle with Leo. It was about showing up for herself. She bought the dress. She still wasn't sure if she had a date or if she even wanted one. Going alone felt both terrifying and empowering. But as she walked out of the store, the invitation in her purse no longer felt like a summons to her own execution. It felt like a dare. 3 days before the Phoenix Ball, the universe intervened in the form of a spilled cappuccino. Sophia had sought refuge in her favorite sanctuary, the Gilded Page, a small independent bookstore and cafe in a quieter part of the city. It smelled of roasted coffee beans and aging paper, a combination she found deeply comforting. She was at a small table in the back, hunched over a fragile 19th century copy of Moby Dick, a recent acquisition for a client. Her tools were laid out with surgical precision, archival tape, powdered eraser, a bone folder. She was so engrossed in her delicate work that she didn't notice the man approaching her table until he was almost upon it. He was tall and dressed in a way that defied easy categorization. He wore a simple grey cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and well-worn leather boots, clothes that suggested quality and comfort, not a desire to impress. His hair was a little unruly, and he had the thoughtful, slightly tired eyes of someone who spent more time thinking than talking. He was trying to navigate the narrow aisle between her table and a shelf of poetry when a college student with a massive backpack swiveled abruptly. The student's bag caught the man's arm, sending the large cappuccino he was holding arcing through the air. Sophia reacted on pure instinct. With a speed that surprised even herself, she swept her arm over her table, shielding the antique book as the hot, milky coffee splattered across her forearm and the wooden surface. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," the student stammered, horrified. "I'm so sorry," the man said simultaneously, his voice a calm, low baritone. He ignored the coffee seeping into his own sweater and immediately focused on her. "Are you all right? Did you get burned?" He grabbed a handful of napkins from a dispenser and with a surprising gentleness began to carefully dab at her arm, his movements efficient and concerned. "I'm fine," Sophia said, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline. "Thank you. The book. Is it okay?" She carefully inspected the volume. It was untouched, safe under the protective sleeve she always used. A wave of relief washed over her. The student, flustered and apologetic, practically fled the scene. The man, however, remained. "Let me buy you another coffee, and perhaps a pastry to compensate for the assault." He offered a small wry smile. "My name is Alexander." "Sophia," she replied, finding herself smiling back. "And you don't have to. It was an accident." "I insist." "Besides," he said, gesturing to the now empty poetry shelf aisle. You saved me from having to pretend I understood Rilke. You've done me a great service. They ended up sharing a table. He insisted on buying her a new coffee and a croissant, and to her surprise, the conversation flowed effortlessly. He asked about the book, and his interest was genuine. He didn't just nod along. He asked intelligent questions about the binding, the paper, the history of the edition. She found herself explaining the art of restoration with a passion she usually reserved for her work. In return, he spoke about his own work in vague but intriguing terms, mentioning systems architecture and efficiency modeling. He talked about a love for building things that were elegant, durable, and functional from the ground up. He sounded more like a master craftsman than a businessman, and Sophia found it captivating. There was no posturing, no name-dropping, no subtle attempts to gauge her net worth or social standing. He was just interested in her. It's rare to meet someone who creates and preserves things of substance in a world obsessed with the ephemeral. He remarked, his gaze thoughtful, as he looked at her hands, which still had a faint smudge of graphite on them. That one sentence resonated with Sophia more than any compliment she had received in years. He saw her. Not the ex-wife, not the socialite, but the restorer, the preserver of stories. They talked for nearly 2 hours until the afternoon sun began to fade. As they prepared to leave, an idea both bold and terrifying sparked in Sophia's mind. It was Maya's voice in her head urging her on. Exist. Beautifully, unbothered. This is going to sound incredibly forward, she began, her cheeks flushing slightly. But I have an invitation to a charity event on Saturday, the Phoenix Ball. I was planning on going alone, but... She trailed off, suddenly losing her nerve. Alexander didn't miss a beat. His expression didn't change, but a warmth entered his eyes. I would be honored to accompany you, Sophia, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. On one condition. What's that? That you tell me the story of the first book you ever fell in love with. And just like that, she had a date. A kind, intelligent, grounded man who seemed utterly unimpressed by the glitz and glamour the ball represented. As she walked home, a genuine, unforced smile graced her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She had no idea who Alexander really was. She just knew that for the first time she was actually looking forward to the gala. She wasn't going to prove a point to Leo. She was going with a man who appreciated substance in a world of surfaces. The Serafina Grand Hotel was not merely a building, it was a statement. A century-old bastion of opulence. Its marble floors gleamed under the weight of colossal crystal chandeliers, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with wealth and influence. On the night of the Phoenix Ball, this effect was magnified 100-fold. Women in gowns that cost more than cars, dripped with diamonds, and men in bespoke tuxedos conducted business with hushed, confident tones. Sophia felt a familiar pang of anxiety as their car pulled up, but it was different this time. It wasn't the crushing insecurity Leo used to cultivate in her. It was the healthy nervousness of stepping back into a world she had left behind, but on her own terms. Alexander, seated beside her, seemed completely unperturbed. He had arrived at her apartment in a classic, impeccably tailored tuxedo, but his demeanor was the same as it had been in the coffee shop, calm, attentive, and focused entirely on her. You look breathtaking, Sophia, he said, his voice a quiet anchor in the sea of noise and flashing cameras at the entrance. He helped her from the car, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. Her midnight blue dress, once a source of apprehension, now felt like armor. It didn't shout, but it held its own. As they walked up the grand staircase, a ripple of recognition went through the crowd, but it wasn't for her. Whispers followed them. Heads turned. Sophia initially assumed they were staring at her, the disgraced ex-wife making a surprise appearance. Then she realized all eyes were on Alexander. The city's power brokers, the tech titans, the stern-faced matriarchs of old families, they were all looking at him. some with awe, some with deference, some with undisguised envy. A portly man in a too-tight tuxedo practically tripped over himself to greet them. "Mr. Sterling, what an unexpected honor. We weren't aware you'd be gracing us with your presence tonight." Sterling. The name clicked in Sophia's mind. Not just Alexander. Alexander Sterling, the founder and CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, the reclusive tech billionaire who had revolutionized data security. He was a legend, a ghost in the machine of modern commerce, famously private and rarely photographed. He was the kind of man Leo Vance pretended to be in his wildest dreams. Sophia felt a dizzying wave of shock. This was the man who had debated the merits of vellum with her over a croissant. He saw the question in her eyes. "We can leave if this is too much," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. "My apologies. I value my privacy. I should have been more forthright." "No," Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt. She took a deep breath. "No, it's all right. I'm glad you're here with me." And she meant it. His identity changed the context, but not the man himself. His presence was no longer just comforting. It was a fortress. They had just acquired their champagne when the real show began. The press cameras at the entrance flashed with a renewed frenzy, and a wave of sound washed over the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, arriving now, Mr. Leo Vance and his fiancée, the incredible Skylar Monroe." The event host boomed over the microphone. Leo and Skylar made their entrance not as guests, but as a spectacle. He was preening in a velvet tuxedo, a smug grin plastered on his face. Skylar was a vision in her silver Valdrin Sahiti gown, which seemed to be composed more of light and crystals than fabric. It was a magnificent dress, but on her it felt like a costume. She posed, she pouted, she blew kisses to the cameras that followed her every move, her personal vlogger trailing her like a pilot fish. They held court in the center of the room, air-kissing acquaintances and soaking in the adoration. It was only a matter of time before Leo spotted her. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping over faces, and then they locked on Sophia. His smug smile tightened. He saw her dress, her quiet elegance, and then his eyes landed on the man beside her. He didn't recognize Alexander. To Leo, he was just some anonymous man in a tux, a placeholder. Perfect. This was the narrative he wanted. His ex-wife, trying desperately to keep up, had brought some no-name date to the biggest event of the year. With Skylar in tow, he strode towards them, a predator closing in. "Well, well," Leo began, his voice oozing condescension. "Sophia, I'm surprised to see you out. I thought you'd be at home with your books." The last word was laced with pity. "Hello, Leo," Sophia said, her voice even. Her hand found Alexander's, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze. "And this must be your +1?" Leo said, barely glancing at Alexander before turning his full dismissive attention back to Sophia. "I want you to meet my fiancée, Skylar Monroe." He presented her as if unveiling a masterpiece. "You've probably seen her work. She's a true force in the digital space." Skylar gave Sophia a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, hi," she cooed, her eyes doing a quick, critical scan of Sophia's dress and simple jewelry. "That's a lovely dress. So classic." The unspoken addendum, "old boring safe," hung in the air between them. "It's so brave of you to come tonight. All of this must be a little overwhelming." The performance was for her vlogger's camera, which was now pointed directly at them, capturing every nuance of the carefully orchestrated humiliation. Sophia refused to take the bait. "It's a beautiful event for a worthy cause," she said calmly. "It's good to see it so well attended." Leo laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Always so diplomatic. Some things never change." He then turned to Alexander, finally, deigning to acknowledge him. "So, what do you do, pal? Let me guess. Accountant, lawyer?" He was trying to place him in a box to categorize and dismiss him. Before Alexander could answer, the event host was back on the microphone. "And now we'd like to present this year's Visionary Philanthropist Award to a man who has redefined the landscape of modern lifestyle branding, Mr. Leo Vance. A smattering of polite applause turned more enthusiastic as Leo's supporters cheered. He beamed, squeezed Skylar's hand, and shot a final triumphant look at Sophia. "Duty calls," he said. "Enjoy the party." From the sidelines. He walked toward the stage, the spotlight following him. Sophia watched him go, the sting of his words sharp and familiar. It was one thing to be discarded, another to be so publicly and cruelly reminded of it. Alexander's hand was still holding hers, a silent, solid presence. She looked up at him and saw that the calm, thoughtful expression on his face had been replaced by something else, a quiet, glacial stillness. He wasn't angry, he was observing, calculating, and in that moment Sophia had the distinct feeling that Leo Vance had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Leo stood on the stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, feeling invincible. He held the crystal award in his hand, a tangible symbol of his success. Skylar watched him from the front table, her phone held high, recording his moment of glory for her millions of followers. "Thank you. Thank you." Leo began, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. "They call this the Visionary Award, and it truly takes vision to build something from nothing. It takes drive, it takes passion, and most importantly, it takes having the right partner by your side. Someone who inspires you, who pushes you to be better, who sees the future and runs towards it with you." He paused, locking eyes with Skylar. "To my incredible fiancée Skylar, this is as much yours as it is mine. You are my inspiration." The crowd applauded. In the background, Sophia stood motionless. Every word was a carefully crafted erasure of her own history. The late nights, the sacrifices, the belief she had poured into him, all of it deleted. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a profound, hollow sadness. Alexander watched her face. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, the way she held herself perfectly still to keep from shattering. He had seen enough. While Leo continued his speech, boasting about his brand's influence and his unprecedented growth, Alexander discreetly took out his phone. His movements were minimal, almost unnoticeable in the dim light. He typed a short, simple message to a single contact, Robert. "Initiate the Serafina acquisition. Use the discretionary fund. I'm on site. Confirm when complete." He put the phone away. That was all. No dramatic pronouncements, no raised voice, just a quiet command sent out into the digital ether. Leo finished his speech to another round of applause and practically floated back to his table, high on his own rhetoric. He caught Sophia's eye again and gave her a pitying smirk. He then turned to the general manager of the Serafina, a man named Mr. Dubois, who had rushed over to congratulate him. "Mr. Vance, a spectacular speech," Dubois gushed. "Truly, the hotel is honored to host your triumph." "Of course, Dubois," Leo said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's the premier venue in the city. Where else would I be? We bring a certain prestige, don't we?" He leaned in conspiratorially. "Make sure my fiancée's champagne glass stays full. On the house, of course, for the publicity." "Of course, Mr. Vance. Anything you need." It was this small yet telling exchange that solidified Alexander's decision. It wasn't just the personal insult to Sophia. It was the cheap arrogance, the casual disrespect for the people and the place that served him. Leo didn't see a historic hotel. He saw a backdrop for his Instagram. Alexander gently touched Sophia's arm. "Would you care for a walk on the terrace?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape the suffocating atmosphere. They stepped out into the cool night air. The terrace overlooked the city, a breathtaking panorama of glittering lights. For a few minutes they stood in silence. "I'm sorry, Alexander," Sophia said finally. "You didn't sign up for all that." "I signed up to spend an evening with you, Sophia," he replied, turning to face her. "Nothing that happened in there changes that. His words have no power unless you give it to them." Before she could respond, a harried-looking Mr. Dubois burst onto the terrace, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He wasn't looking at Sophia. He was staring at Alexander with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Behind him, a woman in a headset. The event coordinator was whispering frantically into her microphone. Mr. Sterling? Dubois stammered, his sycophantic demeanor toward Leo completely gone, replaced by trembling deference. Forgive me, I just received a call from the ownership group, from your people. Alexander simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. There seems to have been a transaction, Dubois said, his voice barely a whisper. A rather significant one, effective immediately. He swallowed hard. Welcome, sir, to your hotel. Sophia froze. She looked from Dubois's terrified face to Alexander's calm one. The city lights swam before her eyes. Your hotel? Alexander gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Thank you, Mr. Dubois. I trust my ownership will not be a problem. No, sir, not at all. An honor, a supreme honor. Good. Alexander said, his voice still quiet, yet it now carried the weight of absolute authority. First, please extend my compliments to the chef. The meal has been excellent. Second, please inform the bar staff that all drinks for the remainder of the evening are on me. It's a celebration. Yes, Mr. Sterling. At once. And Mr. Dubois? Alexander added, his voice dropping slightly. There is one other thing. Anything, sir. Alexander's eyes flickered for a moment towards the ballroom, where Leo was laughing loudly, holding his award up for another photo. It has come to my attention that one of your guests, a Mr. Vance, believes his presence here grants him special privileges. He seems to be under the impression that he owns the room. A look of pure dread dawned on Dubois' face. I'd like you to correct that misunderstanding for me. Alexander continued, his tone smooth as silk. Discreetly, of course. Please present him with his final bill for the evening. Everything. His table, his guests' meals, the champagne he so generously offered on the house. And please add a 20% gratuity for the staff he has been treating so poorly. My staff? Dubois looked as if he might faint. Right away, Mr. Sterling. Right away. He practically ran from the terrace. Sophia stared at Alexander, utterly speechless. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The scale of it. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a scene. He had simply bought the building. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Leo. Mr. Dubois, flanked by two stern-looking security guards, approached Leo's table. The vlogger's camera was still rolling, catching the moment. Dubois leaned in and spoke in a low, urgent tone. The smug grin on Leo's face vanished, replaced by confusion, then indignation, then sheer, stark panic, as a leather-bound billfolder was placed firmly on the table in front of him. What is this? Leo's voice was loud enough to carry. This is a mistake. My expenses are covered. There is no mistake, Mr. Vance, Dubois said, his voice now devoid of any warmth. The hotel is under new ownership, effective 10 minutes ago, and the new owner wishes to settle accounts. The words hung in the air. New ownership. Whispers erupted around the room. Who? How Skylar's perfectly made-up face was a mask of confusion. Her camera, still live-streaming, caught Leo's face, turning a blotchy red as he opened the bill. The amount was astronomical. This is ridiculous, he sputtered, looking wildly around the room. His eyes fell on the terrace doors where Sophia and Alexander were just stepping back inside. He saw the way Dubois kept glancing nervously in their direction. He saw the way the most powerful people in the room were now looking not at him but at Sophia's quiet, unassuming date. And in one horrifying, gut-wrenching moment of clarity, Leo Vance understood exactly what had just happened. The man he had dismissed as a +1 had just bought the entire goddamn hotel to settle a score. Skylar's livestream captured it all. Leo's face crumpling in humiliation. The frantic whispers, the collective turning of backs as the initial social hierarchy of the room seismically realigned in real time. The spotlight that had so recently bathed him in glory now felt like an interrogation lamp exposing him for what he was, a small, loud man who had picked a fight with a giant. His influence, his prestige, his entire curated brand, it all evaporated in the face of one quiet, devastating transaction. The car ride away from the Serafina was silent, but it was a comfortable, contemplative silence. The city lights streaked past the window, a blur of gold and white. Sophia was still trying to process the tectonic shift she had just witnessed. It wasn't just about the money or the power or the spectacular downfall of her ex-husband. It was the way Alexander had done it. It was a checkmate delivered with the quiet precision of a grandmaster, not the boorish gloating of a street brawler. "Are you okay?" Alexander asked finally, his voice cutting gently through her thoughts. She turned to look at him. In the dim light of the car, he was just the man from the coffee shop again. Thoughtful, kind. "I think so," she said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "I've never seen anything like that in my life." "He was disrespectful to you," Alexander stated simply, as if that explained everything. "I have a low tolerance for bullies." "You bought a hotel, Alexander." The words sounded absurd and wonderful at the same time. He gave a slight shrug, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "It was a sound investment. The property was undervalued, and the general manager clearly needed a lesson in priorities." He paused, his expression turning serious. "But that's not what matters. What matters is that you never have to feel diminished by him again. His chapter is closed." And in that moment, Sophia knew it was true. The lingering hurt, the sting of his public erasure of her, it was gone. It hadn't been purged by revenge, but by the overwhelming evidence that she had moved on to something so much more real and substantial. Leo's world was a flimsy stage set. Alexander's was the bedrock beneath it. Her victory wasn't in Leo's defeat. Her victory was sitting right next to her. Meanwhile, the digital world was exploding. Skylar, in a moment of panic and flawed judgment, had kept the live stream going far too long. Millions of her followers had watched in real time the exact moment her fairy tale evening imploded. They saw the bill. They saw Leo's apoplectic, helpless face. They saw the pitying and scornful looks from the other guests. The clip was ripped, reposted, and went viral within the hour. The internet, once Leo and Skylar's kingdom, turned on them with merciless speed. The comments section of Skylar's page became a wasteland. OMG, he got owned by his ex-wife's new man. That look on his face when he realized the plus one was a billionaire. Sky is the limit, more like debt has no limit, LMAO. All that talk about being a visionary, and he couldn't even see who was standing right in front of him. "This is the best thing I've ever seen. The way the new owner bought the whole hotel just to shut him up. Savage. Quiet savage." The hashtag Serafina Showdown trended worldwide. Memes were born. Leo's face of horrified realization was photoshopped onto everything from crying cat pictures to stock market crash charts. Skylar's brand of manufactured perfection was shattered by a single brutal dose of reality. Her followers, who had bought into a fantasy, felt cheated. Their adoration curdled into ridicule. The next morning, the consequences bled from the digital world into the real one. The Vance lifestyle brand, which was built entirely on the perception of influence and success, began to crumble. A major athletic wear company that had just signed a seven-figure endorsement deal with Leo and Skylar called to indefinitely postpone the campaign launch. An investor in Leo's latest venture, a high-end men's grooming line, pulled his funding citing concerns about brand integrity. Leo's power had been an illusion, and Alexander had ripped the curtain away for the whole world to see. Sophia woke up to a flood of texts from Maya, mostly just keyboard smashes and links to Twitter threads. She read a few, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. There was no glee, no triumphant fist-pumping. There was only quiet. The noise that had surrounded Leo for years, the noise he had used to drown her out, had finally been silenced. Later that afternoon, her phone rang. It was Alexander. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice warm. "I've just acquired a first edition of Dante's Inferno with original Gustave Doré engravings. It's magnificent, but it has some slight water damage on the cover. It needs an expert, and I was hoping that expert might also be free for dinner tonight." Sophia smiled a real unburdened smile. She looked around her quiet apartment at the books, waiting patiently for her care at the life she had painstakingly rebuilt for herself. It was a good life, a substantive life. "I think," she said, her heart feeling light and full, "I can fit that into my schedule." Her new chapter wasn't about the downfall of her ex-husband or the wealth of her new companion. It was about her passion, her strength, her quiet victory. It was about a woman who had learned to find value, not in the noise of public approval, but in the beautiful, resilient substance of her own story. Weeks turned into a month. The digital shockwave of the Serafina showdown had lasting repercussions. Skylar Monroe attempted a clumsy pivot. She posted a tearful black and white video titled "My Truth," where she spoke about the pressures of living a public life and the pain of seeing her relationship scrutinized. It was a valiant effort to reclaim the narrative, but her audience, now cynical, saw it as just another performance. Her engagement plummeted, and lucrative brand deals dried up, replaced by offers from detox teas and mobile games. Her relationship with Leo, built on the unstable ground of mutual brand enhancement, began to fracture under the weight of their shared public humiliation. Their once perfect Instagram feed became sporadic and strained. Leo Vance simply disappeared. He deactivated his social media, and the Vance lifestyle brand website was replaced with a simple "under construction" page. Rumors swirled that he was facing lawsuits from disgruntled investors and had sold his flashy downtown condo at a loss. He had built his identity on a pedestal of perceived success, and when it was kicked out from under him, he had nothing left to stand on. Sophia, by contrast, had never been more visible, yet she remained firmly out of the spotlight. Stories had run in business journals and high society pages about the mystery woman who captivated tech mogul Alexander Sterling. But she declined all interview requests. Her anonymity was her own, and she guarded it. Her business, however, flourished in the most unexpected way. A curator from the prestigious Morgan Library and Museum, who had been at the gala and was impressed by the quiet dignity with which she had handled the confrontation, reached out. He hadn't known about her connection to Alexander at the time. He had simply been told by a mutual acquaintance that she was the best rare book restorer in the field. He commissioned her for a major project, the restoration of a collection of hand-illustrated medieval manuscripts. It was the project of a lifetime work that demanded all her skill, passion, and expertise. Her success wasn't a byproduct of Alexander's wealth. It was the direct result of her own talent, a talent that was finally being recognized on its own merits. Her relationship with Alexander deepened far from the glare of paparazzi and the opulence of galas. They spent weekends at his understated country estate, not hosting lavish parties, but taking long walks in the woods, reading by the fire, and engaging in hours-long conversations about everything from astrophysics to the history of papermaking. He was fascinated by her mind and her quiet strength. She was drawn to his powerful intellect and the profound kindness that underpinned his every action. He never treated her like a conquest or a trophy. He treated her like a partner. He would often sit in her workshop for hours, simply watching her work, content in the shared silence. He once told her, "My world is about building the future, Sophia. It's all code and projections. You keep the past alive. You remind me that some things are meant to last." One crisp autumn afternoon, about 2 months after the gala, Sophia was walking through a park near her apartment. As she rounded a bend, she saw a solitary figure on a bench, staring blankly at the ducks on the pond. It was Leo. He looked diminished. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple jacket and jeans. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a weary slump. The charismatic energy had been extinguished, leaving behind a tired, defeated man. He didn't see her, and she had no desire to approach him. She didn't feel a surge of triumph. She didn't feel hatred or pity. She felt nothing at all. He was a stranger, a ghost from a story that was no longer hers to read. She simply continued her walk, the sun warm on her face, leaving him behind in the fading light. That evening, as she and Alexander were preparing a simple dinner together in her apartment kitchen, he handed her a small, beautifully wrapped box. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. Inside was the 19th century copy of Moby Dick from the coffee shop. But it was different. He had had it professionally rebound in the softest midnight blue leather to match the dress she had worn to the gala. On the inside cover, in elegant gold leaf, was a small embossed whale. "A reminder," he said softly, "of the day you shielded something of substance from a storm." Sophia traced the outline of the whale with her finger, her heart full to bursting. She looked at Alexander, at the genuine love and respect in his eyes, and she knew. True wealth wasn't owning a hotel. True power wasn't commanding a room. True happiness wasn't a hashtag. It was this: the quiet moments, the shared understanding, the profound, unshakable knowledge that she was valued not for who she was with, but for exactly who she was. And that was a victory no one could ever take away. Nearly a year had passed since the night of the Phoenix Ball. The seasons had turned, and with them, the narratives of all their lives had settled into new, more permanent forms. The Serafina Showdown was now a piece of internet lore, a case study in branding classes on the perils of manufactured influence. For Sophia, however, it was a distant echo, a story about a woman she barely recognized anymore. Her life now was one of quiet rhythm and profound joy. The Morgan Library Project had been a triumph, cementing her reputation as one of the preeminent restorers in her field. Her relationship with Alexander had blossomed into a true partnership, a seamless blend of their two worlds. They were the architect and the archivist, one building the future, the other preserving the past, finding their perfect equilibrium in the present. This particular Saturday found them at his country estate, a place of rugged stone-warm wood and vast windows that looked out onto rolling hills. It was a home, not a showpiece. Sophia was in the sun-drenched library, her fingers gently tracing the tooling on a 17th century atlas, while Alexander worked across from her, sketching on a large tablet. He wasn't designing a skyscraper or a new data center. He was designing a dream. "I have a question for you," he said, his stylus pausing mid-air. He turned the tablet towards her. On the screen was a breathtaking architectural rendering, a building of glass steel and reclaimed timber that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. It was modern, yet timeless. "This is the preliminary design for the Sterling Foundation's new central community hub. The city has already approved the land grant." "It's beautiful, Alexander," Sophia said, genuinely impressed. "It looks like a library, a museum, and a park all in one." "That's the idea," he confirmed. "But it's missing a heart, a soul. My board wants a standard digital resource center. Efficient, clean, sterile. I think that's a profound failure of imagination." He zoomed in on a large wing of the building. "This section here, I envision it as the living archive, a place dedicated not just to storing physical media books, manuscripts, photographs, films, but to celebrating them. A place with restoration labs visible to the public, workshops for bookbinding and calligraphy, soundproofed rooms for listening to vinyl records. A place that teaches new generations that our history is tangible, that you can hold it in your hands." He looked at her, his expression earnest. It's a massive undertaking. It needs a director who doesn't just understand preservation, but who believes in it with their entire being. Someone with the vision to build the collection, design the exhibits, and lead the entire division. It needs you, Sophia. Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't a casual offer or a pet project for the billionaire's girlfriend. This was a serious, demanding, public-facing role. It was everything she had once shied away from. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. To be a public figure, not for her association with a man, but for her own knowledge and passion. Alexander, I'm a restorer. I work in quiet rooms on one page at a time. She said the old hesitation, a faint whisper. And now you can build the rooms, he countered gently. You can inspire 1,000 others to care for those pages. This isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about building the lighthouse. Don't you see it's the culmination of everything you are? He was right. It was the natural next step, the ultimate expression of her life's work. It was a chance to build something permanent. Yes, she said, her voice clear and firm. Yes, I'll do it. The project, which they began calling The Hearth, moved quickly. As director of the archival wing, Sophia was tasked with acquiring foundational collections. She spent her days meeting with estate planners, collectors, and university librarians, building a library from the ground up. It was during this process that a ghost from her past reappeared, not with a bang, but with a quiet, desperate email. The email was sent to the Foundation's General Acquisitions address. It was from a private art consultant representing a Ms. S. Monroe, who was looking to sell a significant collection of 20th century fashion photography books, including several rare signed first editions by masters like Richard Avedon and Helmut Newton. Sophia stared at the name. S. Monroe. It could only be one person. A quick, discreet inquiry by Alexander's team confirmed it. After her public fall from grace and her breakup with Leo Schuyler Monroe had been forced to liquidate her assets, the photography collection was one of her last valuable possessions. We don't have to pursue it, Alexander told her that evening, his hand covering hers. There are other collections. Sophia thought for a long moment. She remembered the empty performative woman at the gala. She remembered the vicious online comments and the brutal collapse of a life lived on social media. There was no sense of triumph in it anymore, only a grim sadness. No, she said finally. The collection itself is world-class. If the provenance is clean and the price is fair, the Hearth should have it. I'll handle the meeting myself. The meeting was set for the following week at a neutral art gallery downtown. Sophia chose her outfit with care, a simple, professional, grey dress, her hair tied back. She was not Sophia Hayes, the ex-wife, or Sophia Alexander Sterling's partner. She was Ms. Hayes, the director of the archival wing. She arrived first and was examining a painting when Schuyler walked in. The change was jarring. The glamorous, over-the-top influencer was gone. In her place was a young woman who looked her age for the first time. Her hair was its natural colour, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no discernible makeup, and her clothes a plain black turtleneck, and jeans were neat but unremarkable. The biggest change was in her eyes. The confident, challenging gaze was gone, replaced by a deep, weary anxiety. She didn't recognize Sophia at first. She approached nervously, looking for the Foundation representative. Ms. Monroe, Sophia said, turning to face her. Schuyler stopped dead, recognition, confusion, and a wave of pure horror washed over her face. She looked like she was about to bolt. You, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Hello, Schuyler, Sophia said calmly, extending a hand. I'm Sophia Hayes. I'm the director overseeing acquisitions for the project. Please, let's sit. They moved to a small seating area. Schuyler sank into a chair, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She wouldn't meet Sophia's eyes. I didn't know it was you, Schuyler stammered. My consultant just said it was a new foundation. I can go. That isn't necessary, Sophia said, her tone gentle but professional. I'm here to evaluate the collection. That's all. Tell me about it. Why did you collect these specific photographers? The question seemed to catch Schuyler off guard. She had likely expected scorn or pity or a gloating lecture. She hadn't expected a professional inquiry. She hesitated, then began to speak, her voice shaky at first. My grandfather was a photographer, not a famous one. He just shot for local papers. But he loved Avedon. He had a print of Dovima with elephants hanging in his darkroom. He taught me about lighting, about composition. He said a great photo doesn't just show you a person, it tells you their entire story in a single frame. As she spoke, a flicker of genuine passion ignited in her eyes. She talked about Newton's provocative power, about Penn's elegant simplicity. She wasn't reciting talking points. She knew her subject. This collection wasn't just an asset she'd been given. It was something she actually understood and loved. Sophia realized with a jolt that buried deep beneath the vapid influencer was a person with a genuine interest, a story of her own that had been papered over by hashtags and sponsorships. And Leo, Sophia asked softly, the only time she would mention his name. Schuyler flinched, but she answered. He thought it was a good investment, something to make me seem sophisticated. He never opened a single one. A bitter, sad smile touched her lips. He's in Singapore now, trying to launch some crypto consulting thing. He emails sometimes. It's like he doesn't even remember what happened. He's already rewritten the story in his head. It was a pathetic, fitting epitaph for the man who had tried to rewrite Sophia's story. He was a ghost, haunting his own failed narrative on the other side of the world. Sophia made her decision. The collection is magnificent, Schuyler. It would be an honor to have it at the hearth. We'll pay the full asking price from the valuation. Tears welled in Schuyler's eyes. Why are you doing this? She whispered. After everything, I was awful to you. I'm doing this because the books deserve to be seen, Sophia said, her voice full of a grace she didn't know she possessed. And because my grandfather loved books too. She stood up, offering her hand again. Good luck with whatever you choose to do next, Schuyler. Schuyler shook her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Thank you, she said, and for the first time it sounded real. Months later, the day of the groundbreaking ceremony for the hearth arrived. It was a bright, clear day. Sophia stood at a podium facing a crowd of city officials, donors, and community members. Alexander was in the front row, his eyes fixed on her, glowing with pride. She looked out at the crowd, unafraid. She was no longer a ghost at someone else's feast. This was her stage built on her terms. We stand here today at the beginning of a story, she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified in the open air. A story about building a bridge between the past and the future, between the silent wisdom held in the pages of a book and the infinite possibility of the digital frontier. In an age of fleeting images and disposable information, we are making a promise that our stories, our collective history, will not be erased, that they will have a home, a place of substance, a place to last. She finished her speech to thunderous applause. She walked down from the podium and took her place beside Alexander. Together they picked up 2 silver shovels and alongside the mayor plunged them into the rich, dark earth. As the cameras flashed, Sophia looked at Alexander, her partner, her friend, her love. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the quiet, rebuilding, the serendipitous meeting over a spilled coffee, the spectacular night that closed one chapter, and the beautiful, substantive life that had followed. She wasn't the woman who had been humiliated by her ex-husband anymore. She wasn't even the woman who had watched him fall. She was the woman who was now building a legacy, spadeful by spadeful, right here in the light. So what's the real takeaway from Sophia's incredible story? It's a powerful reminder that in a world that shouts true strength, often whispers. While her ex-husband chased the hollow echo of social media fame, Sophia quietly invested in herself, in her passion, and in her own worth. His empire was built on sand, ready to be washed away by the first tide of public opinion. Her foundation was built on the bedrock of authenticity and skill. The dramatic climax at the gala wasn't just about an ex-husband getting his comeuppance. It was about the universe spectacularly realigning to reward substance over surface. It proves that the most powerful currency isn't followers or fame, but self-respect. If Sophia's journey of quiet dignity and ultimate triumph resonated with you, show some love by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. And for more stories of justice, resilience, and the power of authenticity, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.